Okay. Well, it looks like we've been pretty stable for a minute here, and I'll be prompt like a train conductor and leave right at the top of the minute. So welcome everybody to the BSA Housing Committee. I'm Sarah Kudra. I'm one of the co-chairs along with Ganesh Ramachandran. Today we're here to talk about the cottages at Shattuck. And Ganesh will be also speaking to this project here with us, as well as Kendra Hallowell with Icon Architecture. So before we begin, just wanted to also mention we are looking to have one more event this season, this year. We will be hosting a housing topic Pachakacha. So that's the fun rapid fire 20 slides and 20 seconds per slide. And so we are going to have an open call for folks to come and participate, and that'll be kind of a year-end wrap-up sort of festive thing. We are going to do it digitally, assuming that some sort of illness will be sweeping, even if it's just the common cold. Okay, and then quick question I saw in the chat asking about AIA. We are not registered for this event, so there will be no need to send in your number. Sorry, we'll try that for the next activity. So. With that, I'll turn this over to Ganesh and Kendra.
So Sarah, are you host as well? Can you see who's waiting, or it's had to be
I can. I
okay.
will admit the stragglers, please.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I just acknowledge the presence of my colleague, Jack Kelleher, the director of small projects. We could not have pulled this project off without, Jack's very active involvement. When we have like the toughest challenge to do in DCAM, they just like have Jack's number on the speed dial. So it's just, good for us, not so great for him. So we, Jack, feel free to pitch in when, I'm just going to tell the backstory. We got a call from Secretary Sutter's office. This was sometime in like September of like last year, saying, the short story is that the mass and cast is out of control, and as a state, we have to do something about it, and we have to figure out a solution. And they have already identified a vendor who would make these prefabricated homes, and who had been manufacturing it in Seattle and have a successful track record of putting this together in LA and Colorado, and we should work with them. So that's kind of our charge. And then we started scrambling for sites where we can do it. As some of you might know, if we are building anything in a state property, doesn't require zoning clearance from local regulatory authorities, though we would normally work with the town, but we are not required by law to get any approval. So the obvious choice was working on state properties, and very soon we landed at the Lemuel Shattuck Hospital campus. This is in Jamaica Plain, close to the Franklin Park. What also helped was there weren't any residences close by, so that minimized potential neighborhood opposition. And it is a campus that already has, it was offering mental health services and substance abuse services. So it seemed like a good option, and we kind of got started on that. Next slide. So as I was letting you know before, maybe the next slide. And this was an extraordinary team effort, and everyone like gave their like 120% on this project, because doing anything in state government in like 3 months is a challenge, let alone like planning something, getting permits and getting it done. So and we are very grateful for our partners here who made this happen.
And I'd like to acknowledge, I think I saw John Chan from RW Sullivan is on the call as well. So I want to acknowledge it.
Yeah, thanks.
You guys.
Vital member. Hey, John.
So in terms of location, it's about like 25-minute walk from the Jamaica from the Forest Hills T stop. If you are driving by, you wouldn't even notice it. The campus is kind of hidden behind, unless you have something to do in the Shattuck Hospital. It's very unlikely someone would have visited the site. And next slide. So it was a pretty tight timeline. We started our first kickoff meeting by late October, and just because we are a state entity doesn't mean we don't need any regulations. In fact, like we have much more stringent regulations to follow from our colleagues. So there was a lot of paperwork and regulatory requirements which we had to cover before we could even like start breaking ground. And there were a lot of hearings. And Jack, maybe like can you talk a minute or two about like what it entails to like get anything done for us?
Sure. Well, the kind of start off was really just informal phone calls as word of this leaked out, and we were really scrambling to figure out how exactly you would try and code classify these cabins, because there really are cottages, excuse me, because there's really no portion in the code to address something that is of this nature. So it's again a lot of informal phone calls, a lot of inquisitive phone calls from the state fire marshal, Boston Fire Department, and then after we got Kendra's team, including SLS Code Consulting on board, they came up with a really solid plan for what exact variances would be seeking. It was very clear that there were phone calls being had because a lot of no's turned into yeses, but Secretary Sutter doesn't like that. So, really kind of started in the blind, and then, asking for variances as we went along. I mean, you can see this, well, it says December 26th, but I know this article came out before, and we were already building kind of before we had our, certainly I think the plumbing board hearing.
There wasn't really a vacant parcel where we could build. It was all a parking lot. We all know what happens when you take away parking spots. People are not going to be happy. So we had to like we have to replace the spots that are gone. We have to use kind of the island that was there in the middle of the parking to create extra parking. So that was a whole lot of work just to like build a parking lot. I mean, we needed have to like get any clearance for that. It's like us increasing the parking. But while we were doing that, we were trying to like make sure our paperwork is in progress for all these hearings. Next slide. So in terms of program, the little squares which you see, they are the individual shelters which can sleep one bed, and the larger rectangles can sleep two persons. And we have a community room. A few of these larger ones have been converted into an admin space or a nurse's station. We needed restroom, including accessible restroom, and we converted one of the cabins into a laundry. So those were all like prototypes that were provided by Pallet. However, they all had to be customized. So it's not Seattle weather. We are working for the New England winter, and it survived like 1 year. But the estimated lifespan, what they guarantee for these, is about 10 years. But these can actually, the biggest selling point for them, which is why EHS was interested in the first place, is they can actually be put together in like 2 to 3 hours per shelter, maybe not more than 4 hours. And that's true. The shelters can be put together, but then once we talk about power, utilities, fire alarm, that's where the real story is, and we can talk more about that during the discussion. Next slide. That's the aerial view of that before we even got started. And the Franklin Park to the back, that's the trees, and to the right side is the parking lot.
So one of the reasons that
Yeah.
we chose this site in the back corner of the Shattuck parking lot is because there used to be a building in the middle of this parking lot. So we thought this makes sense. There should be electricity here. There should be power here. There should be sewer near here. So the first thing we needed to do was get out there and start looking for where those services were. Jack and Ganesh just mentioned, the regulations. In the state of Massachusetts, there are a number of pretty specific regulations that come into play. I think when the projects began, we thought that these would count as temporary structures, but for a number of reasons, we ended up having to layer in additional systems that would make the authorities having jurisdiction comfortable with what we were proposing. So even though these individual shelters came with a smoke alarm, there was concern that someone could tamper with that. So we layered in a number of additional systems in order to make it safe for everybody living there and for the HJs to be comfortable with the site becoming actually occupied. So a couple of the things that we talked about with the with BBRS are I mentioned adding a sprinkler system. So we added a looper on the exterior of the entire site with a fire alarm system to connect to each and every single one of the shelters. We needed to ask for relief on the building envelope. Now, these they unfold, they can be set up in about 3 hours, but they literally are folded up and their building envelope is very slim. The two types of shelters, they range from an R value of, I think it was 2 or an R value of 5. See Sarah smiling. And then additionally, structurally, because they sort of are tilt-up structures, their snow load, their roof load was doesn't meet the current code. The argument there, or the qualification there, is that the insulation is so low that the snow will not gather on the roof because it'll melt and fall off. So there were a lot of open conversations about how this would work. I think we also had to provide, snow removal plan, emergency evacuation plan, to really talk through how the site would work. I think that was, so again, we really had some good conversations, really relying on SLS as our co-consultant. And throughout it, the AHJs were really helpful, both in setting up and supporting the group through hearings. And they also came out to the site regularly to see the construction happen and see how it all came together. Structure on the site, I mentioned we're in the middle of this parking lot. We looked at this rear corner and looked at grade, looked at what kinds of subsurface structures there were, as well as where we thought the water line would come in, where we thought the sewer line would go out. So these are some sort of initial diagrams we went through. Again, working with a great team. We did have to go out to Boston Water and Sewer to get their buy-in on the plan as well, with a few bumps along the way. But again, everyone worked together and at great speed. We worked together very closely. I think we were meeting a couple of times a week regularly. Often we were meeting, we started meeting at 8 o'clock in the morning. We had calls at, on Friday nights, once we discovered things, to try to reconfigure. And we really got into the weeds very quickly, working in Zoom, working on just getting notes on their plans with the full team, with the design build team, meant that things happened very quickly and everybody worked together. Having the contractor at the table with great, I'm looking at these images and thinking the carpenters were great. Everybody was pitching in to make this happen. We did need to bring in water lines. Now, the way these are set up, the sleeping shelters have electrical to them, and they have all electric heat and cooling. But we focused the water service in 3 buildings here in the middle, the hygiene shelters that included 3 bathrooms, right? Each with a shower and toilet and sink, and then the laundry shelter. So each of those needed the water line. where the water came in, we needed we designed a doghouse to go in the back to help shelter and insulate and access those systems. So that's what you're seeing here at the top right image is our doghouse. We had to construct a separate, the electrical room is there at the bottom right. It's freestanding near the admin room. So we really, one of the biggest challenges here was the regulations, and then how do we build for New England winter?
Thanks, Kendra. I also want, when Kendra was talking about parking, let you know this was a 24/7 hospital, so that we had to keep that in mind because we just couldn't stop the flow of traffic. And moving on from that,
Just real quick,
yeah.
Gonna mention the electrical. I mean, because of the absolute ban that the Boston Fire Department put on propane, everything's electrically heated, and everything's tankless as well. So we're drawing 1,200 amps across the parking lot, which is just like an extraordinary amount to try and keep this place warm and powered.
I'll also note we did have to set up an emergency generator because we also, in the interest of getting this occupied, we did a phased project where the first half, if you're looking at this plan here, the left-hand side of the plan was fully occupied and running with a generator and temporary bathrooms and showers because it was so vital to get people off the streets and into these shelters. And so in the meantime, the right-hand side of the plan was a full-blown construction site with the construction trailer just there to the right. So there was a lot happening all on top of each other.
And we wouldn't recommend that if you were to do it again.
So now to the fun stuff.
Yeah. So we thought it's really important for these shelters not to just become this kind of characterless shacks, but at the same time to be able to have some kind of voices heard in terms of art. So we worked with this organization called Art Lifting. The organization was actually started in Boston. So what they do is they team up with artists who have faced housing insecurity before, or who are persons with disabilities, who have become either full-time or part-time artists, but they help them kind of sell and license their work. And what we did was we worked with Art Lifting, identified artists who are from the Boston area. It's a national. I mean, they have artists from all major cities, and it's a national nonprofit right now. But we particularly picked artists who have a connection with New England and Boston, identified works, licensed their works, and they were kind of blown up so that they would fit the entire facade of these shelters. So you would see in these photos, maybe we can go to the next photo, you could see some of those. They really do make a huge difference in terms of the quality of space inside. And we also commissioned a mural artist, Ben Jandanian, who has worked in Boston area to help kind of activate the ground plane. So that was hands-on work that was done later on. But these panels that were printed in aluminum and that were fitted to these cottages. Next slide.
Yeah, we were working against the weather, and so we had all kinds of ideas about painting the asphalt surfaces. We weren't able to do that. So everyone being flexible and looking for opportunities to make things happen was great. And of course, the art panels being attached to the ends was a really great idea. I mentioned some of this coordination earlier. We did because I think initially, or for example, in California, you might be able to simply take a parking lot and run water lines across the surface. Here we couldn't do that. We really did have to run our lines below the frost line and come up under the buildings. We worked with a structural engineer to design true footings that you see here. And then that was most of our coordination. I think I'm going to try to push this. I don't know if this is a video. I don't think it is. This is the video. So we did lift these into place. These. And I think you can hear me speaking over this, right? No, okay.
No audio there.
Oh, okay, all right. Well, what this video reminds me of is we were working, the company that builds these shelters, they've got a great product, a great, provide a great service, but what we were struggling with was that we didn't have shop drawings or drawings. So if you can imagine trying to figure out where your plumbing is and where your posts are and where your structure is going to land, and how to coordinate that without having drawings and just working with photographs of real things, because that's part of a prefab or manufacturing process, is that the manufacturers tend to say, well, I've already built it, so here you are. So what you see in this image is that we did have to notch out bits of the sill plates here because the plumbing lines were not quite where we expected them to be. So there was a lot of, again, on the fly coordination. Now, over here, there we are. These are a few photos of the site currently. I think, and looking to the team here, I think that we would say that this project is a success. Since the project was built, more than 40 people have moved. Sorry, more than 70 people have moved through this site. The intent is that people stay about 30 to 60 days and then they move into permanent housing. So there's a real, there's a real process here that moves people through, gets them on their feet, brings new people.
So Kendra, I think these numbers are from our presentation in August. So I'm guessing it's probably much more.
Probably more.
Yeah.
Which is great, really great. And I think everybody's very happy and grateful to be there in this safe place. So there's the photo here on the lower right is inside the community room. It's great to see people drawing on the buildings with erasable markers. I think one of the things that we would perhaps think about differently next time are things like additional storage, additional gathering space. Where do these additional program elements go? I think we had to bring in additional storage after that. I think we're now transition back to meat.
Okay, I just wanted to wrap up speed here because we also have a whole bunch to cover in terms of if we were to do this all over again, how would we do this? So just to give you an idea of the overall cost, it's it cost us like a little over $3 million, not including like the soft cost. And long story short, the cost of shelters are not that much. If you can, if you add them all together, that's just like 11%. So the remaining 89% of the costs are like actual task of putting this together, right? I mean, you wouldn't think of it that way. And, maybe it can be reduced a little bit, we don't know, but not by a significant percent, because the infrastructure we built here is not an infrastructure that could support any kind of housing development in terms of like the sewage, the power, the fire protection systems. I was joking to Jack, if we get like whatever typhoons or everything would be blown away, except we'll have this infrastructure stay there for like another 200 years, because that cost is real, and the regulations requires us to pay for that. So that's something to keep in mind. While the cost of these prefabricated sounds too attractive to be true, and they can all be put together in a day. I mean, they actually put all those things in like 2 days. everything else, the rest of the 88 days or whatever is just rest of stuff. Next slide. So in what did we learn in terms of it was an expedited project, which also meant decisions, we were able to take decisions much faster. We were able to command people's attention. But that said, if we were to do this all over again, we would need a minimum of 6 months of design and construction time, if not more, because that would also help us reduce the cost. The code compliance is very critical. It'll keep the project schedule on track. It'll minimize the prices. And when we are working with the vendor, across the country who's building for a very different kind of climate, it may or may not work. So that's just something to keep in mind. And the agency goals, the site constraints are important consideration. And as I said before, expedited schedule demands more intensive coordination time. It was all hands on the deck effort. The consultants team were extraordinary, but it's also not very sustainable to have this kind of project, drinking from the fire hose every day. And it's more costly. And in terms of scale, there are benefits to increasing scale. There are economies of scale, but we do not think we should scale these things up necessarily, because you don't want to create some kind of a huge refugee or homeless settlement here. You need to create a sense of community, and smaller scale matters. What we think is maybe 20, but definitely not more than 30 residents per community, which we think is the ideal. And once again, to reinforce what Kendra said, it's really important to have good drawings if you were to do this on time, on schedule. Over to you, Kendra.
All right, great. So as we were going through this process, we kept saying, how would we do this differently? Would it have been better, for example, if we built it all stick built on site? Because we were doing all this infrastructure, how different would it have been? So we said, what are the options if we look at a prototype? So these, the program and assumptions are some baseline givens that we took on to give us a constant. So if we are building 30 units, 30 beds, ranging in size from 100 to 300 square feet, there's a certain amount of common space. 1,000 square feet, some important outdoor space. So essentially similar scale and program to what we built at Shattuck, but let's take it out of context and think about how we would do this again. So we looked at, along a scale of mostly prefab on the far left to mostly stick built on the far right. And a range in between, which would consist of from the prefab standardized, which is you purchase it. This is like what we did here at Shattuck, using the pallet shelters. The next step over, prototype B, would be, well, what if we have the sleeping shelters or prefab, but we stick built the bathrooms, the laundry, right? These places that need water, need the infrastructure coming in below, putting the foundation, the distribution. Prototype C is, what if we did customized prefab, manufactured shelters and hygiene facilities that are customized to meet the Massachusetts plumbing code, for example. And then lastly, here on the far right, what if we just stick built it all using standard conventional construction that everybody knows so well? Thinking about this, I threw in this slide because just to think about modular construction or offsite construction, one of the benefits really is saving time. These two photographs at the bottom of the page are from a project I did recently. These two photos are taken in the same week, where we had on the left-hand side, we're building the podium, while on the right-hand side, the same week we were installing tile. So you can really condense your time frame by building with off-site construction. Looking at the schedule there, this just illustrates again how you could cut the time frame down by integrating prefab or off-site construction to save time. And again, time is money to cut that back. We looked at the different benefits of each of these prototypes. I think one of the real benefits to prototypes C and D are that they are customizable and would be code compliant, which would mean that the process through permitting would go smoother. I'm highlighting here. The benefits to C and D are that it is customizable, and then contrasting that, the challenges with a prefab standard, you buy the box and you get what you get, does require code waivers, conversations. We also looked at differences between here on the left with more prefab. They're less customizable. They probably have shared bathrooms. Whereas I think as we go to the right-hand side, there's more flexibility in integrating private bathrooms, which sort of helps people along the way to more permanent housing and stability. Ganesh, do you want to add anything as we're going here? Okay. Then lastly, looking at some construction costs, and these are again a little out of date, but they're still sort of order of magnitude worth looking at. And what we summarize this out to be is that the spread is not too great, but there is potentially a benefit in following up potentially on the combination of customized manufactured the prototype C, because you get the you get private bathrooms and you don't have the additional waivers or lack of compliance.
That cost number isn't quite right. It's more close to like 160 to 180. So as you could see, it's really not cheap to do these things, and and they don't last forever. Yes, it works in terms of expediency. We were able to get what we wanted, but a little bit more time in terms of planning, design, construction goes a long way.
Yes. So then we visualize these, looking at square footages, looking at site areas, sort of determining again with the far left being most standardized. They are not customizable compared to on the far right being built on site. Of course, you could probably, there's a lot more flexibility there. The team would be more comfortable with it, and you could have a little more freedom there. But perhaps somewhere in the middle might be the best approach, where you can do a combination of offsite and site built.
And the same vendor, like major lesson learned is those bathrooms just were not, and showers just were not worth it. They dropped 400 amps. Probably a majority of our change order, contingency came out of there. And I think all the rough plumbing, right, was just about rebuilt.
Yes. I think we replaced all the vents, all the PVC, the sizes. I think we did, they customized for us some of the plumbing fixtures, but that was a hard thing to follow through on.
Should we open up for questions?
I'll help get folks thinking on this. Something you're, on this scale of the really prefab to the kind of more customized. I wonder if you would weigh what would, let's say if these are a little bit more well insulated and comfortable shelters, then perhaps the turnover of the space would not necessarily be as quick. Do you think that there's an aspect to that spectrum where the kind of occupants turnover in order to kind of utilize this as the shelter it's intended to be? Would that kind of weigh into that judgment of how involved to do the project if you were to do it again? You said they were like 3 months or so. I wonder if that threshold was more about the pipeline of where folks were going to and being placed, or if it had anything to do with the kind of comfort of the occupancy.
No, it doesn't. I think if I remember it, that's yeah. Actually, I'd like to welcome Josh Curry to the conversation. Josh is with EHS. There are two people in this project who were reserved to like field angry phone calls. One is Jack Kelleher and another one is Josh Kerry. Jack from the contractors and everybody else like gets to like call Josh. So Josh can. So I Josh, feel free to weigh in, but I don't think that the comfort, it's there were a whole other parameters in terms of who gets here, how long they stay here, and there's a support service agent, the third-party company, Commonwealth Care Alliance, that's there that manages it. Josh, maybe you can talk a little bit more about.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to the design of the program. When the state was brought in to support the city on issues related to mass and CAS in September of 2021, there was approximately, from assessments done by Boston Public Health Commission and Boston Healthcare for the Homeless, a little over, it was around 330 individuals who were residing in the area, sleeping outdoors, or so to speak, rough. And we knew from the needs assessment that roughly 30% of individuals would go to a nearby congregate shelter, and that 95 were willing to move and relocate to non-congregate placements that had services attached. And we knew leading into the winter, which the risk to human habitation, also the continued risk to the individuals residing in the area due to ongoing active drug use, a lack of public health intervention and solutions. And we really needed to, beyond sort of the traditional sort of approach of hoteling, identify new types of models that better serve individuals who were experiencing symptoms from co-occurring mental health and substance use disorder, which led us to sort of pursue the pallets in the Shattuck and sort of thinking through this as a non-congregate type new model in this area, where it's been sort of implemented in California and warmer weather areas, which I know Jack and Kendra spoke very well to the challenges of trying to bring this model to fit a colder environment. Really by design, though, we didn't view this type of model as a permanent supportive housing, given that they're temporary structures. The design of the program was to really provide an intensive sort of 24/7 stabilization service that included on-site medical recovery coaching and access to MOUD, which is medication-assisted treatment for specifically for substance use disorders such as opioid addiction, which was primarily the individuals we served, and also access to mental health services, but most importantly, intensive housing case management support, with the goal of really average length of stay being approximately 60 days as folks would connect with these services, stabilize medically, and sort of engage in level of mental health and recovery coaching support, then transition into longer term permanent supportive housing. And through our providers, Commonwealth Care Alliance and Elliott Human Services, that sort of link and handoff would remain a warm touch as they'd be connected to a tenancy support case manager through that's funded through a Medicaid support stream. So really, it was a very mindful balance of architectural design and these project structures for creating a non-congregate, different approach to sheltering, coupled with that pathway to longer term permanent supportive housing.
That's great. Thank you. We're seeing, did you want to add to that, Jack?
Yeah, sir. I mean, maybe in the spirit of your question, the real delay when it comes to trying to do things through the state is just A, the kind of restrictive procurement guidelines we have, and B, just decision making. There's a lot of people that want to understand, the volume and have a weigh in. And I've worked with Josh and his team with the command center a couple of times. If there's something they're really good at, it's like, enough. You're putting cottages and you're putting here. Go, make it happen, make it work.
Yeah.
And that alleviates a lot of, kind of just the cyclical decision-making process that we tend to get, caught up in.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm a little nicer on this call than I can be on some of the more heated calls. I think, it was a declared public health emergency, and the timing was urgent. I think it required a lot of all hands on deck and cross-agency collaboration with DCAM, DHCD, and the city of Boston to really push forward and sort of jump over hurdles we'd see to the traditional development process that Ganesh and Kendra highlighted in the presentation.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, we're getting a few more questions here from the chat. So Todd Larson asks, do you think the cottages at Shattuck could be a good model for affordable housing communities in general? Why or why not? And what would be needed and what would need to be done to adapt the prototype for general affordable housing?
I think I could take a crack at it. I think it's a particularly good model for transitional housing. I have worked in affordable housing project as a planner and urban designer for many years in my career. And I think it's challenging to, if you're creating housing that's connected with the neighborhood, this is actually not one of the preferred models because, they are isolated. And that kind of helped us in a way because they were isolated, we could actually get this thing done. So it really serves the purpose of like having someone onboarded for like 2 months, try to deal with their mental health issues and other healthcare issues on site, give them the kind of independence so they are not part. A lot of people, like I spoke with the artist who was there, and he had actually interacted with the residents, and he was saying like they all just love it here, and it's been like such a change for them to be here, and I think that it creates that safe space for them, and at the same time it is a model that can be done quickly. So I think it's a good model for transition, but I'm not sure if it's necessarily a good model for like affordable housing. I think an affordable housing need to be better integrated with the community. That's my take. Josh.
I was gonna build exactly on what Ganesh was stating. I think the unique nature of the location for the Shattuck is that there's a lot of available land, and it's connected to a nearby T station. However, other parts of the land that have been looked at for use of this type of model don't have that same connection or to a community that has accessible services. And thinking through for homeless individuals or even moving towards families, creating models would be more complicated for affordable housing. A lot of the folks we're working with don't have access to transportation or rely on public transportation, and the location of services is really crucial to that. And I think the challenge of trying to find land use that has still accessible transportation and sort of allows folks to connect to work opportunities, even the grocery store or anything else is really crucial for affordable housing and sort of integration into a community.
And I also think there's a larger philosophical, discussion beyond the scope of this. Is like, if the communities are not interested in doing their fair part in accommodating, if they just think they all should be there in Boston and like these campuses, and I don't think that that's a sustainable solution either. You can't just find other Shattuck hospitals, just put like 21 people. It's not going to get to where we want. So I think it has to be a little bit more comprehensive approach there.
This was a unique case study. And I think we've also been looking at different ways of living. I think for affordable housing, I think there is an opportunity for offsite construction to create affordable housing. Modular construction isn't cheaper. It can be really high quality. It can be passive house. It can be, really efficient. And it can be built offsite so that it can be brought in so that labor costs in certain areas are, can be managed. So I think there's an opportunity there, but I don't think it's this particular product.
Thanks.
I just follow with it. I still think this was absolutely worth it. Even if it was a spectacular failure, which it was a great success. And our value stinks. You're better off in a sleeping bag. And it draws a lot of electricity, and the interactions between particularly the electricians and the residents and the care providers while the place was occupied, you're still in construction. I will never forget. But through all of it, through the trials and tribulations, I think it's a successful project and it helped. So, all we do is the construction. I mean, the social implications, like Ganesh said, it's a really freaking hard problem to solve.
Yeah. Well, Jack, you teed up perfectly the next question. So Aaron Riley says, since so much went into making these shelters habitable by current code standards, would it help to just get more built without the heating, plumbing, and electric, as at least some improvement over sleeping outside in a door with a sleeping bag?
The wraparound care that Josh has been speaking to, that's an important part of it as well.
I mean, the regulations wouldn't allow it.
Yeah.
They wouldn't even allow the fire alarms that were there in these shelters. I mean, like, and the heat. I mean, it's like the bar is so high, and like, and we just don't have. I mean, even despite the emergency declaration and whatnot, we still have to like answer to Boston fire marshals, and so it's really hard.
Yeah.
Could I ask a follow-up question then? This is
please.
Aaron. Yeah. Is there, with your experience in this, and Josh, with your experience, in the more than just, like housing someone overnight, would it make sense? Would you guys advocate for trying to lower that bar? Like, I guess what I'm asking is, if there weren't all these regulations, do you think that it would actually be helpful to just put up the prefab and have it be, like I said, just, one step up and not let the perfect be the enemy of good, Thanks.
Where would we start, Jack? I mean, it is a legislative solution. I mean, it's.
Yeah, I mean, Aaron, I think if Boston Fire, I'm trying to think, if they had allowed us to go propane rather than electric, the heating elements would still present quite a fire hazard. They kind of protrude out from the back wall, where you're just guaranteed to be, hanging things off of it as a kind of a, hanging bar. The localized smoke detector was easily disableable. And it's not that the code standards are bad. And I agree that, there was always an aspect of like, hey, this is at least a step up, right? So let's keep going and keep going and keep going. But maybe, like, if we could adapt some sort of an emergency provision to the code or exception to the code, maybe. The problem with the board is that they're usually right. I mean, these shelters aren't going to be here for 2 years. They're going to be here until they start to fall down, because they do solve provide a temporary fix to the problem. And I don't know, we could try,
I'll just I'll skip order. We have a couple more questions in the chat, but Ben Carlson asks just about that same question again. What's the anticipated longevity of the cottages regarding both physical design and its ownership and management and operational funding?
The longevity in terms of the physical design is more straightforward answer, because I'm just going to tell you what Pallet told us. That's about 10 years. In terms of ownership, it's a state-owned property. So unless the state spins off the property for redevelopment, whatever, it'll continue to be with the state. In terms of management and operational funding, maybe Josh, you can take that question.
Yeah, for operational funding, we're currently funded with the service provider through end of FY23, so June 30th, 2023, and will likely extend. I think our thought currently, though, is as Ganesh noted, is that the Shattuck campus there's been a long process for redevelopment as we move operations from the hospital to East Newton Pavilion, and reimagining what the Shattuck grounds would look like, which the deed of the land is restricted to public health usages. And we did, over a multi-year process, where we involved the community advisory board and vision planning, and ultimately issued a request for proposal for redevelopment in June, and have recently closed and have received one proposal the state is reviewing. We're still assessing sort of what the future is for the land and sort of what role the cottage would play. I would note a plan that would involve which is likely the tearing down of the hospital itself, though possible to have the cottages still reside on that specific campus, it would most likely not be ideal, as me and Jack learned from occupancy during construction during the initial phase of this project. Though, however, I think there's still potential, given the shelf life of the cottages themselves, use to relocate these and ensure they're still serving vulnerable individuals across the Commonwealth.
And I was just kind of commenting from a just historical perspective. TCAM has projects to refurbish modular structures at other facilities that are 25 years old, and where the cost of the construction probably exceeds the cost of the modular itself, threefold, because it extends rather than making a decision.
Really interesting. I have a couple more questions. I think then we'll be kind of wrapping up. So Krista Benoit is asking, are there similar projects in the pipeline in other vulnerable communities in Massachusetts?
I'll take a quick stab at this one. There's been interest from other municipalities in Massachusetts around pallet or tiny type home communities, which I think, thinking it through in comparison to Boston, other municipalities in the city, which are sort of less, have more available land use, this could be a potential option with given access to their public transit system. I think we're also, the other alternative in addition to tiny home models is the use of hotels or even defunct nursing homes as sort of rehab investment, which we've seen from agencies such as Father Bill's and the Pine Street Inn to purchase and acquire a hotel and then convert into permanent supportive housing and individual micro apartments, often with their own bathrooms and kitchenettes, which can be, given there's only a limited amount of hotels as well as defunct nursing homes that are available, but it is a very interesting sort of approach to creating more cost-effective permanent supportive housing that adds to our housing stock.
Well, thanks, Josh. I think we paid you for that comment. We have spoke about a conversion of hotel to housing that was done during the pandemic, just at our last event. And for folks who missed it, they can find it on our committee page at the BSA website.
Glad to speak to it. It's a very exciting opportunity. I think
it's the Brockton
challenge
project.
Yep.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, the two more I think we have we'll cover and then wrap up. So we have Kim Burnett has asked, can you talk a little more about the non-congregate approach and why the non-congregate approach was an important part of the program? Did that limit the options for renovating an existing building to meet the number of beds?
Josh, I think it's tailor-made for you. Yes.
So at the time we became involved in the project, we were hearing from over the summer, there's roughly over 1,000 individuals congregating or residing within the area of Massachusetts. And by the time we moved to September, October, and we did the more sort of person-to-person needs assessment, knew it was roughly 330. During the summer months, there was over 200 available congregate shelter beds not being used or having nightly census at via Boston Public Health Commission's nearby shelter, which was less than a block away from where the encampment was. And we knew from the needs assessment that there was a lot of reasons why folks were not engaging in the traditional congregate shelter model. One, rules related to entry and exiting. Folks were oftentimes required to reserve a bed or come in by 6 p.m. and couldn't exit out and then come back into the facility once entering. All of the congregate shelterings in the state are also single gender, so it's not suitable for couples or even individuals that may have pets. And furthermore, for individuals who have sort of long been pinged through the emergency tertiary responsive shelter, emergency medical stay, inpatient psych hospital, congregate shelters, they're tough places. Limited room, there's no place to store personal belongings. Individuals have reported having valuable possessions stolen, acts of violence committed to them, or just general discomfort and trust issues due to post-traumatic stress disorder for residing in more tight-knit congregate facilities. And that we knew that non-congregate provides the dignity of personal space and sort of also with the palette, sort of the healing power of community to engage with service providers, as well as sort of then go back to your room and have time for oneself. And that's really crucial for a lot of individuals who've been residing for years on the street in encampments or within shelters to have that personal space, but be able to still balance it with seeking community.
Yeah, thank you for that explanation.
Just
So last
one-
question, go ahead. Do you want?
Oh, let's take the last question and then I'll wrap up.
It's a quick one, absolutely. Drake Jacobs asks, what is the plan for the units when the temporary use is terminated?
We don't know. It could coincide with the time the site gets redeveloped, so it might just work itself out. As a closing note, I just want to, we talked about units and cost and how long it takes, but what I think all my colleagues would agree with me. We're really proud of is like we think we were very successful in creating a community. It's not like a bunch of shacks put together. Whether it's through art or the services or the sense of security and the safe space we are able to create. I think it does a very good job in terms of the scale of the units, in terms of where it's located. And I think to that, I think all of us who have been involved in this should be proud of, because it is something that each and every resident attests. And I'm sure, Josh, you have heard from some of them personally about this. And I think that's really important for them as they move on to their next journey, the next level of housing and towards independence.
One little build on note on that, we've served over 70 individuals today, and 50 individuals have transitioned into long-term housing. And if we look at the health outcomes of folks who have been within the program, we've seen 100% of engaged in housing case management, but we've seen over 70% of individuals engage in receiving medication-assisted treatment or recovery coaching for substance use disorder. We've seen over 70% as well engage in mental health treatment. And then I believe we last check, we're at 100% we're engaging in primary care treatment, which is various amazing results for folks who are coming from very challenging circumstances. That this type of structure and approach to social services and sheltering is achieving this, which is not similar to more congruent models that don't provide that touch and connection to services that can allow for what we've seen with the folks who've moved into the permanent supportive housing, a very, very high rate. I believe almost all individuals have remained in their long-term housing to date.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you all so much for presenting. I'm glad we had a couple of folks join in who could help elaborate on the presentation. Thank you, Ganesh and Kendra. And thanks to everyone for joining the Housing Committee event. And look out for the final event of the year, which will be a Pachakacha. More information will be out soon.
All right. Thank you all. Have a good afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.